Welcome to Night Stories from VHS Era. You've arrived at a place where the glow of old television screens, the hum of rewinding tapes, and the softness of forgotten childhood dreams come alive once more. Each night will take a quiet journey back in time to sleepy suburbs, moonlit driveways, warm summer breezes, and the kind of memories that feel just a little too magical to be real. Here you don't need to worry. Just press play and let the night unfold. Before we begin tonight's story, let's take a moment to slow down. Close your eyes. Take a deep breath in through your nose. Hold it gently. And now, exhale slowly through your mouth. Let the day melt away with that breath. Again, breathe in deeply. Feel your shoulders soften. Now, release and let go of everything you don't need to carry right now. Imagine you're lying on a cozy bed in your childhood room. Outside, the wind hums softly. The light from a small lamp glows like a warm memory, and the sound of a distant VHS tape spinning fills the air with comfort. You are safe. You are still. And the night is yours. Let's begin tonight's story.
Welcome back to Night Stories from VHS Era. I'm glad you're here. Have you ever felt like the world shifted? Even if just a little, the moment you held something in your hands for the first time. Do you remember the exact day you stopped feeling like a kid and started thinking, maybe I'm growing up? What was it like to feel important before the world gave you permission to be? And do you remember that sound, the beep, that meant someone needed you? Tonight, I'll take you back to a time when everything moved slower, but every little moment seemed to matter more. Stay with me until the end of the video, because by the time we finish this memory together, you'll know exactly what it felt like to carry your first pager in your pocket, ... and believe with your whole teenage heart you were finally stepping into the world of adults. It was the spring of 1995, and the world had a different color to it. Everything looked just a little warmer, a little more alive. You could still smell cassette tape plastic in car glove compartments. People said things like rad without irony, and I had just turned 15. It happened on a Wednesday afternoon after school. At the kitchen table that had a tiny scratch shaped like a smiley face on its corner, the one I always traced with my finger while eating cereal, my mom came in with a small box in her hand, a look on her face like she had something to say but didn't quite know how to say it. She handed it to me without much ceremony. "Your dad and I thought you might need this," she said. It was black, simple, and fit right into my palm. Motorola Bravo Plus. It had that faint industrial plastic smell, the one that always reminded me of new VCRs or cordless phones. I held it like it was a rare artifact. A pager. My first pager. The moment I clipped it to my jeans, I swear I stood a little taller. Did it really make me feel like an adult? Absolutely. I walked out of the house that day with it on my hip, and even though no one had beeped me yet, I imagined they might. Maybe a friend, maybe my mom, maybe someone I hadn't met yet, who'd need something only I could help with. Back then, having a pager was more than convenience. It was identity. It said something before you even opened your mouth. Doctors had them, business people had them, and now me, a kid with barely enough allowance to buy Gushers from the vending machine aisle. Had one too? Do you remember that feeling? It's like suddenly you were important, or at least pretending well enough to believe it yourself. I remember walking into the arcade that evening, and everything seemed ... different. The blinking lights from Street Fighter 2, the hum of the air hockey table, the scent of popcorn from the snack counter. It was all the same, but I wasn't. I kept checking my hip like someone might page me right in the middle of a game. I'd have to pause and say, "Hold up, I've got to make a call." Of course, no one paged me that day, but that didn't matter. That first night I couldn't sleep. I kept the pager next to my pillow, its tiny LED screen glowing faintly in the dark like a nightlight for responsibility. I imagined it going off in the middle of the night and me getting up, finding a payphone, and doing something grown-up. I didn't know what, but something. Did you ever feel that? The excitement of waiting for that beep? The anticipation that made every quiet second? Feel charged with possibility? Eventually the first page came. I was in the middle of Blockbuster aisle 3, trying to decide between The Goonies and Encino Man. I heard the beep loud in my pocket and froze. My heart started racing. People turned their heads. I reached for the pager like it was a weapon or a badge. The number on the screen was my mom's. Just 7 digits. No message. Just a reminder. Call me. I left the store without renting anything. I walked 4 blocks to the Texaco station, the one with the old green payphone that always smelled faintly of oil and bubblegum. Slipping in a quarter felt like unlocking a door. I dialed. She answered. Just checking in, she said. That's all it was? And yet, it meant the world. You see, back then, connection wasn't instant. You had to wait. You had to go somewhere to respond. There's something sacred about finding a payphone, pressing those cold metal buttons. Hearing the dial tone before the ring. Do you remember how even waiting was part of the experience? I started giving out my pager number to a few friends at school. Not everyone had one yet. A few kids rolled their eyes. Why would anyone need that? They'd say, but I didn't mind. It wasn't about need. It was about possibility. Every beep was like an invitation to be present, to be useful, to be seen. I still remember the way it felt in my hand, the weight of it, the way the plastic clicked against my belt buckle. I can still feel the worn rubber of the payphone receiver. In my palm, the rough metal cord swaying as I talked, shielding the receiver with my hand when it got windy. These are the textures of memory. These are the things I carry. Did having a pager make me important? Not really. It made me feel seen. And sometimes, when you're 15, that's more than enough. Looking back now, I smile. That little black box with its tiny screen and gentle beep made me feel like I mattered, like I was becoming something more. I didn't know it then, but those small moments stepping away from the arcade to return a call, waiting in line at a payphone behind a stranger sharing too much about their failed date, those moments stitched the fabric of growing up, and now all these years later, I still wonder, how did something so small manage to make us feel so big? The pager kept beeping, slowly at first, like it was shy to take up space in my life, then more often. A page from my mom reminding me to be home by dinner, a beep from my friend Jonah, asking if we were still meeting at the skate park. I started to notice something strange happening at school. People weren't just sending back phone numbers anymore. They were sending numbers that didn't make sense at first. It's numbers like 143, sometimes just 823. Other times, I'd see 607 and wonder if it was a mistake. Have you ever received a message that made your heart skip a beat before you even understood it? It started with Maria. She sat 2 rows behind me in homeroom and had this way of flipping her pen between her fingers that I thought was hypnotizing. One afternoon, right after our last period, I was standing by my locker when she walked past me and said, in the most casual voice, "Check your pager later." That was all she said. Then she smiled a little, tucked her hair behind her ear, and disappeared into the crowd of backpacks and starter jackets. I checked my pager before I even left school grounds. Just numbers. 143. What could that even mean? It wasn't her house number. It didn't look like a real phone number at all. But something about it made my stomach do a little backflip. On the bus ride home, I stared at it over and over, trying to decode its meaning like I was in some secret spy movie. When I got home, I went straight to the rotary phone in the kitchen and dialed Jonah. "Hey," I said, skipping. "Hello. Do you know what 143 means?" He laughed like it was obvious. "Yeah, it's I love you." 1 letter, 4 letters, 3 letters. I froze. The air got heavier, somehow sweeter. It was like someone had sent me a letter sealed in mystery and romance. And suddenly it all made sense. The numbers weren't just digits. They were feelings, hidden thoughts. Codes passed between hearts without ever needing to say a word out loud. Did you ever tell someone you loved them with just numbers? Did it feel safer that way? Like you could express something huge in just a few blinking pixels? From that moment on, my pager wasn't just a tool. It was a notebook for emotions. And it wasn't just Maria. Friends started sharing their own number codes with each other. 411 meant, "What's the info?" 911 meant, "Call me right now." 121 was, "I need to talk to you alone." Each combination had its own secret meaning, and knowing them made you feel like you were part of something bigger. It's like you were in on a language that only the in-crowd understood. There was a certain rhythm to how messages came in. You'd hear the beep, pull it out with half excitement and half fear, wondering what it would be this time. The LED would glow softly, and you'd read the digits. Sometimes backwards if the screen was glitchy, or if you'd clipped it upside down. But no matter how you read it, you felt something. Because you weren't just receiving numbers, you were receiving intention. The next time Maria paged me, it said 143,823. That one took me a moment. I called Jonah again. 8 letters, 2 words, 3 seconds, he said. "It means I miss you." I didn't say anything for a while. I was just holding the phone, pressing the cord into my palm, trying to wrap my brain around the the fact that someone actually missed me, that someone took the time to learn a code just to say something that delicate. Can numbers hold feelings? I think they can. Back then they did. We started passing codes on paper too, just in case. Folded notes with cheat sheets like 177 equals friends forever. 459 equals I love you. And the classic 831, which meant I love you and always will. It was a language made up of digits, but it said so much. You didn't have to be brave enough to say things out loud. You just needed to know how to count. There was something innocent and sacred about that time. You didn't type full sentences. You didn't swipe or tap. You just waited for the beep, squinted at the tiny screen, and let your heart do the rest. And you never knew when it was coming. You might be eating fries at McDonald's with friends, and suddenly the beep would interrupt you. A glance at the numbers and the world would shift just slightly. You might smile quietly or excuse yourself to go find a payphone, heart beating a little faster than before. I remember one night sitting in the back of my dad's car while he drove us home from the bowling alley. I had the pager in my hand, just waiting. We were passing through the dark part of town where the streetlights were further apart. The only sounds were the soft murmur of the radio and the turn signal ticking gently. Then it beeped. I felt it more than I heard it. I looked down, 143. No other message, just that. I didn't respond that night. I just held on to the feeling. I let it stay with me, like a warm coat wrapped around my chest. Do you remember what it felt like to receive love in numbers? That was our poetry. That was how we learned to say things we didn't yet have the voice for. We're just kids, fumbling. Our way through feelings, using the tools we had, a 7-digit screen, a plastic case, and a whole lot of imagination. Maria and I exchanged a lot of codes after that. Some were playful, some were serious. Once she sent me 143,637, which meant I love you, always and forever. I remember reading it in the school bathroom between periods, staring at the message until the screen faded. I didn't even know how to respond. So I went to the library, found the payphone near the entrance, and dialed her house number. Her mom answered. I panicked and hung up. That was how it was back then. Awkward, real, sweet. We didn't have autocorrect or typing bubbles. We had courage, nervous fingers, and a shared language that was fleeting and beautiful. Sometimes, when I see random numbers on receipts or license plates, my brain still tries to decode them. Like a habit I never quite outgrew. A piece of the past still whispering through the static of now. Numbers were more than math. They were memory, emotion, hope. That tiny screen held more secrets than any social feed today. Because we had to. I mean what we said. Every beep, every code was a moment you had to choose to send. That made it all feel more real. If you were lucky enough to grow up in that time, you know exactly what I mean. And if you didn't, well, maybe tonight gave you a glimpse of how magical it was to say I love you with just 3 numbers? There were 2 kinds of panic in the VHS era. The first was rewinding a tape and realizing it had snapped inside the machine, leaving a tangled black ribbon in its plastic mouth. The second, and far more gut-wrenching, was missing a page. The moment your pager beeped and you weren't near a phone, time started moving differently, slower, sharper. Each second felt stretched out and soaked in urgency. You could be anywhere, at the mall, on your bike, at a friend's house, and suddenly, that small device on your hip would buzz, and then it would stop. Just like that, a second too late, and the number would vanish before you could see it. Or worse, you'd see it, and there'd be no phone around to answer the call. Have you ever felt your heart race not from fear, but from the need to respond? Sometimes I think the real story of our teenage years wasn't just about who sent the message. It was about what we were willing to do to answer it. I remember once I was at the arcade near Lincoln Street. I'd just beaten the high score on Street Fighter 2, the screen blinking my initials like it mattered. People were watching. I was sweating, triumphant. Then the pager went off. That unmistakable beep, short and sharp, cutting through the noise of tokens and synthesized music. Fumbled for it, clipped awkwardly to my belt loop. The screen glowed. 911. That code didn't leave room for interpretation. It meant call now. No jokes. No delays. But there was no payphone in the arcade. Where's the nearest phone? I asked the guy behind the snack counter. He shrugged. Maybe outside the supermarket across the street? Bolted, nearly slipping on the polished tile. Outside, the air was colder than I remembered. I didn't have a jacket, didn't care. I sprinted across the parking lot, dodging shopping. Carts and moms with toddlers. My mind was racing faster than my feet. Who was it? What happened? Was someone hurt? And I reached the phone. My fingers were shaking as I dropped in a quarter. It fell straight through. Tried another. Same thing. Panic bloomed in my chest. I was about to cry when a man in a denim jacket walked by, saw my face, and reached into his pocket. Here, kid, he said, handing me 2 quarters. Looks like it's important. It was. I called the number. It was my sister. She'd locked her keys in the car outside the library and needed me to bring her spare. Nothing life-threatening. But that didn't matter. The emotional weight was the same. When someone sent 911, it meant something. The responsibility felt like a stone you carried in your chest. We didn't have the luxury of ignoring messages. You didn't swipe it away. You didn't think I'll answer later. Because later could mean too late, and being too late. That was unacceptable. The worst feeling of all was when you heard the beep too late, muffled in your backpack, or drowned out by laughter at a party. You'd feel the vibration afterward, maybe minutes later, maybe hours. When you looked at the screen and saw you'd missed it, it was like your heart dipped into ice water. Sometimes, even when you saw the page in time, you weren't near a phone, and in that case, it became a quest. You'd start scanning buildings for those small blue signs, the kind that told you a phone was waiting inside. You'd ask strangers. You'd beg store clerks to let you use theirs. If you were lucky, there was a phone booth nearby. But if not, you had to hustle. Have you ever run like your relationships depended on it? Because back then, they did. Every unanswered page could mean a missed chance to say something important. A fight unresolved. A confession unsaid. A moment lost in the static of hesitation. I remember this one afternoon in early spring. I was skating with some friends behind the school when the pager beeped twice. That was the signal Maria and I had. Agreed on. 2 quick beeps. It meant she needed to talk. Not just wanted. Needed. I grabbed the pager. Flashed 121. Our code for talk to me alone. No phones in sight. The school building was locked. The nearest store was at least 5 blocks away. I took off running, my friends shouting after me. I didn't care. My heart was thumping harder than the slap of my sneakers on pavement. I reached the gas station out of breath, cheeks burning, lungs on fire. The payphone was old and sticky. The receiver smelled like oil and old sweat, but I didn't care. Dialed. She answered on the second ring. Her voice cracked. She'd had a fight with her parents. We didn't want advice. Just someone to be there, even if only over the line. Thanks for calling back, she said, after a long silence. I looked out at the sun, lowering behind the buildings. Always. Moments like that lived longer than any memory you try to force. Because they were earned with your feet, your time, your urgency. Do you remember the honor in showing up? Every message back then was sacred. Every phone call was intentional. We didn't call to scroll. We called to connect. A whisper that could turn into a lifeline if you got to a phone in time. There was this old gas station on Pine and Market that became our unofficial hotline. We knew the clerk, Luis. He let us use the phone by the coffee machine if we promised not to mess around. I must have called half the people I cared about from that little corner, sticky with sugar packets and the scent of burnt beans. When Luis left, they replaced him with a guy who didn't care about our pager emergencies, so we found a new spot. That's how it worked. Your life became mapped out not by places to hang out, but by where you could respond. It was a different kind of geography, one defined by urgency and connection. Even now, when I pass an old payphone covered in rust or graffiti, I feel something deep and warm in my chest, like that static hum of waiting, of hoping, of caring enough to run. That little booth was more than metal and plastic. It was a portal, a sanctuary, a way to keep the thread unbroken between you and the ones who mattered. Sometimes, I wish I could go back to that kind of panic, not because it was comfortable, but because it meant something. It meant you were trusted. It meant someone out there had chosen you as the one they reached out to, and your only job was to show up. Before smartphones, before apps that connected everything in your life with a tap, there was something else that connected us. Something heavier, colder, and far more metallic. Spare change. We carried it everywhere, not for vending machines. Not for arcade tokens, not even for bus fare, though it sometimes served those purposes too. No, those coins lived in our pockets for one reason above all, just in case we needed to make a call. A handful of quarters wasn't just a collection of currency. It was security. It was a lifeline. It was preparation for the unpredictable chaos of youth where plans changed faster than moods, and where one beep from your pager could send you on a mission through the streets just to find a payphone that worked. And when you got there, if you didn't have the coins, you were helpless, so we carried them. Always pockets jingled like wind chimes when we walked. Sometimes the weight was annoying. Sometimes it wore a hole into your favorite jeans. Did it anyway, because not having coins meant not being able to answer the call. And in those days, missing a call wasn't just inconvenient. It was disrespectful. It was risky. It was a chance at connection lost to silence. Some kids kept their change in Altoids tins. Others used zippered pouches or old film canisters. Had a tiny plastic tube that had once held Minnie M and Ms. The label had faded. The cap barely stayed on, but it was mine. I kept it in my backpack's front pocket, always clinking faintly when I ran. I learned to count the quarters by touch. Thumb, index, middle finger, 1, 2, 3. That meant I had enough for at least one good conversation. 2, if I spoke fast. 3, if the person on the other end didn't pick up, because every coin carried time. Quarter bought you a few precious minutes. Enough to say what mattered. Enough to explain why you hadn't called earlier. Enough to say you were on your way. Enough to say you were sorry. Enough to say I miss you. I remember walking home from school one afternoon. The sky overcast, the air thick with the scent of impending rain. I heard the pager beep. It was a new code I didn't recognize, but the number belonged to Mateo. We had a system. A simple one for 3 meant I love you, but sometimes he played with the codes. Invented new ones to make me smile. This one was 38. It didn't mean anything, at least not yet. I reached into my pocket. 4 quarters, 1 dime, more than enough. The payphone was near the old community center, tucked behind a row of newspaper vending machines. The phone cord was cracked, the plastic faded from years under the sun, but it worked. I dropped in a quarter, heart fluttering with anticipation. Hello. His voice came through with static, but it was still his. "Hey," it said, leaning against the booth, feeling the drizzle start to paint spots on the glass. "What's 38? There was a pause, but then laughter. "It's the number of days since. I met you, a quarter well spent. You couldn't swipe coins, you couldn't recharge them. They were finite, and because of that, every call felt more meaningful. Every word had weight. You learned to speak with intention, to listen without distraction. There was no scrolling while you talked, no checking messages, mid-conversation. It was just your voice, theirs, and the clock ticking down with each metallic clink. There were times when I had no quarters, and I had to make tough decisions. Ask strangers. Search vending machines for forgotten coins. Once I even tried to trade my bus pass for 2 dimes and a nickel. It didn't work. But the girl behind the counter gave me a quarter anyway, said she understood, said she'd done. The same before we all had. It became a silent code among us. The understanding that sometimes you had to call, and sometimes you needed help to do it. There was no shame in it. Only community. Only connection. I used to babysit for a family down the street just to get change. They'd pay me in bills, but I'd ask if they could break a few into quarters. They thought I wanted to buy candy. I didn't correct them. I kept those coins. In a tin by my bed, and every time I heard the beep at night, that small vibration on the nightstand, that made my heart leap. I'd know exactly where to reach. No fumbling, no searching, just the cold comfort of preparedness. It's funny how something as small as a coin could represent so much. Safety, readiness, the ability to show up. We didn't call it mindfulness back then, but that's what it was. A kind of presence rooted in the knowledge that moments mattered, people mattered, that if someone reached out to you, you'd be able to reach back. Sometimes I'd see someone at school whose pockets were so heavy with change, their pants sagged a little on one side. We'd smile at each other, nod, no words needed. Just the mutual acknowledgement. You're one of us, the prepared, the responders. The ones who never wanted to say, "I couldn't call you back." One night, years later, I found that old M&M tube in a shoebox of things I'd saved from high school. Inside were 5 quarters, a dime, 2 pennies, and a tiny scrap of paper that said 143 forever. I held it in my hand and felt the ache of time, the beauty of effort, the sacredness of the small things. Today, calls are free and instant. Messages arrive in endless streams piled on top of each other like sand. And yet, they often feel less urgent, less intentional, less felt. Maybe because they don't cost anything, not time, not effort, not even a coin. But back then, every message had a price. And every call was paid with weight, the weight of preparation, of caring enough to carry a pocket full of potential conversations. So we walked around with coins in our pockets, not because we expected something to happen, but because we knew it could. And when it did, we'd be ready always. Before GPS, before Google Maps, and long before everyone had a miniature satellite tracker in their pocket, we built our own kind of navigation system. It wasn't written down anywhere, and it didn't come with step-by-step instructions or glowing arrows. It lived entirely in our heads. And at the center of every mental map was one essential landmark, the nearest reliable. Piney. We didn't just memorize street names or bus routes. We memorized locations of payphones like they were treasure chests, hidden gems scattered throughout the city. Some in obvious places, others tucked away like secrets only the observant could uncover. In a time where being reachable was more than a courtesy, it was almost a responsibility. Knowing where you could make a call was a form of power. My personal map included my house, Mateo's house, school, the library, the community center, and 3 gas stations. 2 had working phones. 1 didn't. The 3rd gas station, just off the highway, had a booth that sometimes ate your coins without mercy, so I only used it in emergencies. I marked it mentally with a tiny red flag labeled risky. Shopping malls were like communication hubs. Most had at least 3 phones scattered near entrances, bathrooms, or food courts. I knew which ones were clean, which ones had gum stuck to the receiver, which ones had cracked glass. I knew which ones echoed and which ones muted the background noise just enough for a private conversation. Sometimes I didn't even need to call anyone. I just liked knowing I could if I had to. There was a comfort in that, a silent assurance. When I was out with friends, we'd often scan corners and walls instinctively, eyes flicking past store signs and window displays in search of a small rectangular box with a dangling black cord. It was a game we all played, but never talked about. Like spotting your car in a crowded parking lot or checking for exits in a movie theater, an unconscious routine born out of necessity. I remember one afternoon, we were at the mall, wandering through aisles of CD shops and neon-lit arcades. Mateo had beeped me just a simple 0 to 0, which meant call me when you can. That could mean anything. A joke, a crisis, a surprise. He'd like to keep me guessing. I'll be back. I told my friends and started my hunt. The first phone near the main entrance was missing a receiver. The second one, near the frozen yogurt place, had a kid sitting on the floor beside it, crying into a Game Boy. I kept walking, mentally pulling out my map. If all else failed, there was one near the employee exit behind the food court. It always smelled like French fries and bleach, but it worked. It was there that I found it, the booth glowing softly under a flickering light. I stepped inside, dug into my pocket for quarters, and dialed the number. He picked up immediately. I was hoping you'd remember the backup phone, of course, I said. It's on the map. It was. My internal map engraved deeper. With every detour, every dead battery, every time the first phone didn't answer, and I had to try the second or third. That map evolved with time, shifting as payphones vanished, as new ones appeared, as old reliable ones turned into vending. Machines or walls of nothing, gas stations were another favorite. Most had one phone mounted outside near the restroom doors, usually covered in faded stickers and surrounded by the hum of vending machines. They felt like roadside shrines forgotten by most, but sacred to those of us who still relied on them. I knew which clerks would let you break $1 for change and which ones would wave you off without looking. One time, in the middle of a storm, my pager lit up while I was at a friend's house across town. No car, no umbrella, just me, my jacket, and a single quarter burning a hole in my pocket. I ran 4 blocks to a gas station I'd only used once before. The phone was still there, tucked beside an ice machine. I made the call, soaked and shivering, my voice cracking with adrenaline. "Where are you?" Mateo asked, laughter in his voice. At the Arctic Circle, apparently. "You're insane." "Maybe, but you paged me. That was enough." We didn't call it love? Not always. Not out loud. But it was the kind of attention that meant something. The kind where you'd memorize where phones were just in case someone needed you. Just in case someone wanted to hear your voice. Just in case a beep meant "come find me." Looking back now, it feels almost mythical. Like we lived in a world filled with secret portals, doors to distant hearts, unlocked only with a coin and the will to walk a little further. But back then, it was just life. Just what we did to stay connected in a world without constant access. There was an art to choosing. The right phone, if it was too public, people could overhear. If it was too remote, it felt unsafe. Sometimes I'd wait in line behind strangers, eavesdropping on the snippets of their lives as I rehearsed what I'd say when it was finally my turn. Other times I'd find one entirely empty, the receiver dangling like an invitation. I once watched an elderly man finish a call, pat his coat pocket, and then press a single quarter into my hand without a word, as if he already knew I needed it, as if he understood. "Be quick, sweetheart," he said. "Some calls can't wait." He was right. Some couldn't. That mental map, once so detailed and precise, faded with time. The payphones disappeared, one by one. The ones at the mall were replaced by vending machines selling headphones and phone chargers. The gas station ones were pulled out, leaving dark outlines on the wall where they used to be. I stopped carrying coins, stopped needing to memorize. But sometimes when I walk through the city, I still catch myself glancing at corners, checking for a flash of silver, a dangling cord, a memory. I'll always remember the feeling of scanning a crowd, not for people, but for payphones, of tracing the steps from store to stairwell to alley, knowing exactly where to find the one that worked, the one that would connect me back to someone who mattered, the one that would let me say I'm here. Even now, with a world of instant connection at my fingertips, there's a part of me that misses the chase, the effort, the maps only I could read, the secret knowledge of where to go when time mattered and you couldn't afford to wait. We were cartographers of connection, and every working payphone was a lighthouse on our map, a place where silence ended and voices could reach across miles, and we never forgot where they were. It always seemed to rain at the worst possible moment, not during lazy weekends or when you were safely tucked under blankets. No, the rain waited for the most inconvenient timing when you had just stepped outside without an umbrella, when your hands were full, or worse, when your pager lit up with a number that made your heart race. There's something almost poetic about it, like the universe was challenging your commitment, testing how badly you wanted to make that call. I remember the first time it happened. I was walking home from school, my backpack soaked through shoes, squishing with every step. The rain wasn't gentle. It was sharp and cold and came in sideways. I was about 2 blocks from a corner store that had a payphone out front, one I had marked in my mental map as mostly reliable, as though sometimes the sound cut in and out if the receiver cord got too twisted. My pager vibrated against my hip. I looked down, pulling up my jacket to shield the screen from the water. 143. That was all it said. I felt the heat rise in my chest, despite the cold. I quickened my pace. When I reached the phone, my hands were shaking. Not from nerves, but from the chill. I pulled out my coins, already damp, and fed the machine. The receiver was slick with rain, cold against my skin. I tucked it between my ear and shoulder, tilting my head to keep it in place. My left hand hovered protectively over the pager, shielding its fragile screen as if guarding a sacred message. The phone rang once, twice. Then his voice warmed, as casual, like sunshine cutting through clouds. "You got soaked for this, didn't you?" "You knew I would," I said, my voice half laugh, half shiver. "You're unbelievable." 143, I whispered. That was all he needed. Rainy calls became a strange kind of ritual.
Not every week.
Not even every month, but often enough to be remembered. There was something raw and cinematic about them, like living inside the final scene of a romantic drama. And there I was, pressed against a graffitied booth, balancing a slippery phone against my cheek with one shoulder, rain dripping from my bangs, speaking softly into a cracked mouthpiece while guarding a tiny screen in my palm like it held the meaning of life. And in some strange way, it did. Those calls weren't just about words. They were about showing up, making the effort, getting soaked to deliver a feeling, because in that era, convenience wasn't guaranteed. Making a call required intention. And when it rained, intention became commitment. I learned tricks. To press my shoulder just right so the receiver wouldn't slip. How to angle my body to block the wind. How to speak clearly even when my teeth were chattering. Once I took off my scarf and wrapped it around the receiver so it wouldn't freeze my cheek. Another time I turned my backpack into a makeshift. Umbrella crouched under it like a turtle while trying to hear over the storm. Strangers would sometimes glance at me, puzzled. A girl standing in the rain, half hidden under the awning of a convenience store, whispering into a wired phone with a look on her face like she was somewhere else entirely. And in a way I was. Those rainy calls felt more real than anything. There was no perfect lighting, no scripted dialogue, just my voice, his voice, and the sound of raindrops pattering against glass and pavement. It was messy and inconvenient and beautiful. Mateo once told me that he kept a mental image of me making those calls, not when he thought of me. That's what he saw, not sitting in class, not walking through the halls, but drenched in rain, eyes shining, pressing a phone to my cheek with one shoulder while cradling a pager like a secret. "You looked like you were in your own world," he said. Like the rest of the city disappeared, and maybe it did. In those moments, the storm outside didn't matter. All that mattered was the connection. the fragile thread of sound that linked us across the chaos, the knowledge that someone had thought of me enough to send a number that I had answered. Sometimes when the call ended, I'd stay in the booth a little longer, just listening to the dial tone, just standing still in the rain, heart full, clothes soaked. There was a quiet power in that silence, a kind of peace that only comes from doing exactly what your heart tells you, even when it's ridiculous or inconvenient. Rain has a way of washing things clean, turning the ordinary into something unforgettable. And for us, it turned every simple beep into a small act of devotion. I never told my parents how often I stopped to make those calls. Don't think they would have understood. To them, a payphone was just a tool, a means to an end. But for me, it was a portal, a moment. A memory. One time, after a particularly heavy storm, I passed by one of my favorite booths and found it flooded. The inside was slick with mud, the receiver dangling lifelessly like a wilted flower. I stood there, staring at it, feeling like I'd lost a friend. I never used that phone again. But I remembered every call made there, every message sent, every whispered 143 carried through the static and the rain. Today, when I see a rainstorm through the window, I still feel the urge to check my pocket, to reach for coins that aren't there, to glance down at a pager screen that hasn't lit up in years. It's a reflex, a muscle memory of the heart. Making a call in the rain wasn't just an inconvenience. It was a declaration of love, of loyalty, being there when it wasn't easy. And every drop that fell on my jacket, every slip of my hand against the cold plastic, was proof that I meant it. No emoji can replicate that feeling. No app notification can stir the same urgency. No text, no call, no FaceTime. It was the rain, the payphone, the pager, and me. And somehow it was enough. There was a secret economy of payphones, a hidden hierarchy of access and timing that everyone understood but no one ever really talked about. You just knew which phones were good and which ones weren't. Some had better sound quality, others had more privacy. A few, the most sought after, were in convenient spots with some overhead covering and low foot traffic. But of course, those were the ones that always had the longest lines. I still remember the payphone near the entrance of Northbridge Mall, right between the movie theater and the pretzel stand. It had this strange power to attract everyone who had just received a page during a matinee or while shopping with friends. It wasn't just that the location was central. It was the way it sat, nestled under the slight overhang of the mall's facade, with a small ledge nearby that made waiting slightly more tolerable. That phone was a magnet. If you didn't get there first, you were doomed to stand behind 5, 6, sometimes even 7 people, each gripping coins in one hand and a crumpled piece of paper with a phone number in the other, waiting in. That line was a kind of purgatory. Every minute felt like 10. You could feel the anxiety radiating off everyone, shifting from foot to foot, keeking around the person ahead of you to gauge how long their call was taking, rolling your eyes when they laughed or gestured with their free hand, clearly turning a quick page back into a full-on conversation. I learned pretty quickly that timing was everything. Right after school let out was a disaster, especially on Fridays. Everyone got paged on Fridays. People wanted to make weekend plans, see who was going to the party, find out if someone had finally worked up the nerve to page them after weeks of side glances in the cafeteria. So if I got a page during 7th period, I'd pretend to take my time walking home, but really I was moving fast, already planning a detour to the 7-Eleven on Oak Street. That phone was slightly hidden behind the ice machine, and not many people used it. The trick was being fast, but not obvious. You didn't want to seem desperate, even if your heart was pounding because your pager had buzzed with a code you hadn't seen before. Something new, something exciting, and you needed to know who it was. The worst lines were at the phones. Right outside school, there were 3 clustered along the brick wall near the parking lot, and each had its own crowd. You'd think having more phones meant shorter lines, but somehow that just attracted more people. Kids would lean against the wall, flipping through their notebooks, listening to music through shared headphones while they waited. Some even tried to cut, pretending they were just checking if the phone was working. no one ever believed. Then, there were unwritten rules, and everyone who used the payphones regularly knew them. Don't take too long if there's a line. Don't make 2 calls back to back. You go to the back of the line after your first one. And definitely don't pretend you don't hear the sighs behind you when you start laughing into the receiver, like you're in your living room. I broke one of those rules once. It was near the food court, and I had waited nearly 30 minutes. The person I was calling didn't pick up. I hung up, waited 3 seconds, then put in more coins and tried again. The girl behind me was not amused. "You serious?" she said, arms crossed, eyebrows raised. I panicked and dropped my quarter. It rolled under the gum machine and vanished. Apologized and gave up my spot. From that day on, I became one of those who planned ahead. I scouted payphones like some people scouted skate spots. I knew which ones worked better in the morning, which were busiest after dark, and which had been vandalized so badly that they only worked if you wedged a penny under the receiver. There was a science to it, a rhythm, and I lived by it. Mateo, of course, had his own system. He liked the phone at the gas station across from the rec center. It was near a flickering light, and for some reason that always made me think of noir. Films, he said it was less crowded, more private. When he paged me with the code 98, our own shorthand for "meet me where it's quiet."
I knew exactly what it was.
Sometimes we beat the lines by meeting halfway. I'd call from one phone, and he'd pick up from another 2 blocks away. It wasn't always romantic. It was gritty and real and based on coordination. We didn't have GPS or live locations. We had instincts, familiarity, and timing once. During a particularly busy Saturday at the mall, I got a page while standing in line for pizza. I ran straight for the phone by the west entrance and froze. The line was ridiculous. At least 10 people, all teenagers, all clearly paged by their own little dramas and romances. I made a split-second decision. I cut through the mall out, the back, down to side streets, and reached the payphone near the dumpster behind the old diner. Not exactly glamorous, but it was empty. I called back and caught Mateo just as he was about to hang up. "You made it," he said, laughing. "Just barely. What did you do?" "Teleport." Mall ninja tactics. That's how it was. All like little operatives, moving through the city with one mission: find an available phone, avoid the crowd, return the call. Some phones even developed reputations. The one at the car wash was sketchy. People said it shocked you if you held it the wrong way. The one near the park always had someone camped out nearby asking for change, which made everyone feel awkward. But the one at the post office? Gold. Clear audio, decent lighting, and for some reason, never a line. Over time, started to notice the same faces at the same phones. The quiet girl from algebra, the guy with the skateboard, the couple who always held hands while one of them dialed. We were all part of this strange ecosystem, orbiting around signals and sounds and steel cords. I think that's what made it feel special. It wasn't just about answering a page, it was about the effort. It's the work you put into being available. The patience required to wait your turn. A small triumph when you got to the phone before anyone else. Today, everything is instant. Messages arrive and disappear in seconds. But back then, even a 1-minute call felt like a victory, like something earned. Avoiding long lines at the payphones wasn't just strategy. It was a way of proving to yourself, to your friends, to whoever was on the other end, that you were willing to go the extra mile, that their message mattered, and somehow that meant everything. Can you hear me? Hello? Wait, say that again? You're breaking up? Those words became a familiar refrain, a kind of mantra chanted into the metal receiver of every payphone I ever used. It was part of the ritual, really. Every call started with some version of that question, and in the moments that followed, you could always count on static that sharp. Crackling fuzz that danced over every syllable like the sound of a storm caught in a jar. I remember clutching the cold, heavy receiver, pressing it hard against my ear while shielding the mouthpiece with my hand, trying to create some kind of audio sanctuary, but it rarely worked. Sometimes I'd hear my own voice echoing back to me with a delay, like a ghost repeating my thoughts half a second too late. Other times, the other person's voice would drop in and out, fragments of words getting lost in the interference. Mateo and I got used to saying everything twice. Once with hope, once with clarity. I miss you, I'd say. What? Miss you. And sometimes he'd just laugh and say, third time's the charm. And I'd smile because even through the fuzz and distortion, we always found a way to hear what mattered. The funny thing is, despite how flawed those conversations were, they felt more intimate than anything I hear today, through a crystal clear video call. Maybe it was the vulnerability, the imperfection. Or maybe it was the effort of holding on to a conversation when every external force was trying to shake it loose. Static wasn't just a sound, it was a character in our story. It forced us to slow down, to repeat ourselves, to listen harder. It taught us patience and precision. There was no space for vague replies or half-hearted sentences. If you said something, you had to mean it, because saying it again meant you really cared. Sometimes the echo would come at the worst possible moment. You'd be in the middle of something emotional, something that felt huge, and then you'd hear yourself say it back to yourself before they even answered. That made everything feel heavier, raw. One night I called Mateo from the phone outside, the bowling alley. The rain had stopped, but the air was thick and electric. I held the receiver to my ear, fingers trembling from cold or nerves, I still don't know which. I had been paged with a 143, but I needed to be sure. I needed to hear it out loud. I love you, I whispered. And before he could respond, my own voice came back to me through the echo, faint and eerie. I love you, it said again. Smaller this time than nothing. No reply, just static. The line dropped. I stood there, heart thudding, rain starting to fall again, staring at the dead receiver. I didn't know if he heard me. I didn't know if I should try again, or walk home, or just stand there and listen to the silence. But I stayed for a moment longer, not speaking, as if maybe, just maybe, the phone would remember our conversation and give me the ending I wanted. It didn't. Of course not. Phones don't have memories. People do. There was something so human about those imperfect calls. Something romantic in the struggle to connect through a line that didn't want you to. It was almost symbolic, really, how we'd bend our bodies, our patience, our voices just to reach each other, how we learned to listen for the message beneath the noise. I knew the layout of every payphone's quirks. Some had softer static. Some had sharper echoes, and a few were notorious for cutting out right at the emotional climax of a call. The one near the bus depot had a screechy hum that made your teeth hurt. The one by the park had such a bad echo that Mateo and I started playing a game. We'd say a phrase and listen to it bounce back and forth like an audio boomerang. Are you there? One of us would say, are you there? There. There. Not because it was funny, but because in a world where so much was uncertain. Laughter was our way of pushing back against the static. Sometimes, though, it wasn't funny at all. Sometimes the echo twisted words, warped meanings, made things sound colder or harsher than they really were. Fights happened that way over misheard words and dropped syllables. There was no tone correction, no emoji to soften the blow. Just a voice, half swallowed by electricity. Trying its best to be understood, and yet we kept calling, because even if it was hard to hear, the sound of someone's voice, their real voice, mattered more than the noise around it. That was the beauty of those days. Imperfection didn't weaken the connection. It made it real. I think back now on all those conversations, scattered like puzzle pieces across different phone booths, each one carrying a memory. Some made me laugh, others made me cry. But they all shared that familiar soundtrack, that hiss, that ghostly echo. It's a sound I'll never forget. We lived in a time where you had to fight for clarity. You had to stand still in a loud world and say, listen, this is what I feel. And sometimes the phone would listen. Sometimes it wouldn't, but we said it anyway. Because love, like static, has a way of lingering, and even now, when everything is clear and clean and instant. A part of me still misses that moment of silence right after the echo, when the world held its breath, waiting for someone to speak. It didn't matter where I was at school, in line at the cafeteria, walking home with my headphones on, or curled up on the couch flipping through a magazine. When my pager buzzed, the world paused. Just for a second. Right. That tiny vibration. Barely more than a whisper against my hip or inside my jacket pocket carried the power to shift my entire mood. It was such a small thing, but it carried such weight, especially when it wasn't an emergency, especially when it was just someone. Saying hi, Mateo used to do that. He'd send a page without any code, no numbers needing decoding, no request to call back. It's just hi in all caps, or waves, or once, look up. And sure enough, I looked up and he was across the courtyard grinning at me like the king of charm. There was something magical about the simplicity of it. That someone had thought of you in the middle of their day and acted on that thought. Typed a short message, pressed send, and sent it out into the world like a message in a bottle, and it found you. It reached you. And suddenly, you weren't alone. These weren't grand gestures. They were flickers of connection, quiet acknowledgments of presence. And for a teenager in a world where everything felt uncertain, those little flashes of attention meant everything. The pagers didn't display emojis. There were no heart icons or reaction buttons, just raw text. But we found ways to fill those characters with warmth. I remember the first time my pager lit up in class. Shouldn't have had it on MIT, it was against school policy, but I did. It buzzed lightly against my jeans, and I remember instinctively placing my hand over it like I was holding a secret. I waited until after class, then ducked into a bathroom stall, heart pounding like it was a matter of national security. Screen lit up with one word, smile. It was from Mateo. I remember exhaling like I had been holding my breath the whole day. That one word, those 5 little letters, filled more space in me than a love letter ever could. Because it came unprompted. Because it wasn't expected. Because it was just for me. Back then, we didn't live in a world of constant communication. We didn't have the luxury of 100 notifications a day. We weren't bombarded with updates or trapped in infinite scrolls, and that made every buzz feel intentional. Every message mattered. There was no way to fake it. No algorithm guessing what you wanted. You either took the time to reach out, or you didn't. I still remember the codes we made up. For ourselves, strange little strings of numbers or abbreviations no one else could crack. 273 meant thinking of you. 999 meant meet me at the stairs. And 0101 was our private joke binary for love. Or maybe just a funny way of saying, I see you, even in the code. Those small messages became our language. It stitched our days together, one brief connection at a time. Sometimes, I'd get a page at the most unexpected moments, while waiting in line to buy a pretzel, while tying my shoes, while looking. Out the window of a moving bus, it never mattered what I was doing. That gentle vibration always felt like a hand on my shoulder, turning me gently toward joy. And it wasn't just Mateo. Sometimes it was Julia, my best friend, sending me you. Okay, when I looked a little off at lunch, my sister typing hurry home because mom was cooking my favorite, or a number I didn't recognize, sending something cryptic like hello sunshine. And later finding out it was Mateo using a friend's pager just to surprise me. Each message was its own tiny miracle. Looking back, it amazes me how something so small, just a handful of letters on a two-line screen, could create such an impact. I think we understood something back then that we sometimes forget now. Connection isn't about quantity. It's about intention. We didn't need an hour-long video chat or a string of voice notes to feel close to someone. One ping, one hi, one smile. That was enough. That was everything. I think we all carried our pagers with a kind of quiet hope. A hope that someone, somewhere, was thinking of us. That someone might take a second out of their life to remind us we weren't forgotten. And when that happened, when that little screen lit up unexpectedly, it didn't just make you feel seen. It made you feel chosen. Sitting here now, in this quiet room, a soft light filtering through the window, I find myself reflecting on how much effort it took just to stay connected back then. It wasn't easy, and looking back, it almost feels like a different world. The simplicity of today's instant messaging and video. Calls makes it hard to believe we used to go through so much just to exchange a few words. Yet, that effort made every single connection all the more meaningful. Remember how you had to always keep your pager close, almost like a secret treasure? That little device was your lifeline to the world beyond the walls you walked through every day. You had to listen carefully for the faint beep that meant someone was trying to reach you. It wasn't like now when your phone constantly vibrates or rings with every little notification. No, back then, missing a page could mean missing something important, a feeling that brought its own kind of panic. You learned to be alert, to carry spare change, to memorize the locations of payphones. Each one of these steps required intention. Finding a payphone was like a small adventure. Whether at the mall, the gas station, or just around the corner from school, you memorized the safe spots. These were places where the phones worked reliably, where you wouldn't be interrupted by long lines or someone else's loud conversation. There was a map in your mind, part of your everyday navigation, alongside the routes to home and school. You became an expert at scanning your surroundings, always prepared to answer the call. Calling back wasn't just a quick task either. You had to carry coins with you and hope the payphone was working. Sometimes it wasn't. Sometimes the line was full, or the machine swallowed your quarters without making the connection. If it was raining, you'd find yourself balancing the receiver between your shoulder and ear, trying to protect your pager's screen from the drops, feeling like you were in a black and white movie scene. Those moments were filled with small frustrations, but also a kind of quiet dignity. You were doing your part to stay connected in a world where connection was a privilege, not a given. It's almost funny now to think about how we avoided the busiest payphones, especially near schools or malls. Everyone had their pager, everyone wanted to return calls, and the lines could stretch on. You'd walk away, look for a quieter phone, sometimes just holding your breath, hoping you wouldn't miss another page in the meantime. It was a balancing act between patience and urgency, and the conversations themselves, how they crackled and echoed through those old payphone receivers. Static and dropped syllables made every call feel like a small mystery, as if the words had to be pieced together carefully just to make sure you heard the right message. Can you hear me? Repeat. Please, it's breaking up. That kind of drama was real, and it made every connection feel alive. Perfect, but precious. But here's the thing I realize now. All that effort, all those small challenges made each connection deeper. When someone paged you just to say hello, it wasn't because it was easy. It was because they cared enough to make that extra effort. When you finally got to hold the receiver and hear a voice on the other end, it was like a little victory, a moment carved out of the noise of every day. Life today, we can text or call anyone at any moment with a simple swipe or tap. The connection is immediate, effortless, and endless. Yet sometimes it feels like those instant connections lack the weight of the old ones. There was a kind of magic in the waiting, in the searching for a payphone, in the urgency of a single beep. Each message carried a story. Each call was a gift and now. As I look back, I feel grateful for those days. I was grateful for the patience we learned, for the care we showed, for the small, vibrating reminders in our pockets that said, "You matter. I'm thinking of you." So, if you ever find yourself feeling overwhelmed by the endless flood of modern communication, remember the pager days. Remember the coins in your pocket, the lines at the payphone, the rain dripping on your face as you held the receiver with your shoulder. Remember the effort it took to stay connected, and how that effort made every connection unforgettable. Because sometimes, the hardest things to do are the ones that matter the most.